Just like Esther, many of us are going through different things in our lives. Everyone is in a different season of their lives. And sometimes we wonder, why do I have to go through all these things? Why do I have to go through these things? And sometimes we are faced with different storms. Like Esther, we are faced with storms of illnesses. Sometimes the illnesses are very sudden. They just creep up on you. And sometimes it takes very long, and you're wondering, what is happening in my life? And sometimes we are faced with the storms of death, and especially if it's very sudden. There are no warning signs. You know, sometimes it's better that someone was sick for a long time and they died. Though it's never easy, but you're sort of prepared. But when it happens suddenly, you're wondering, what? We end up questioning ourselves. What did we do wrong? And sometimes we face the storms of rejection, storms of divorce, storms of separation, and even abandonment. And sometimes it's just the storms of criticism. You're being criticized unfairly. Someone started a rumor, and that rumor has ruined your life. And you're wondering, what could be happening? And sometimes it's physical loss. Maybe you are involved in an accident, and that accident has made your life to just take a different turn in your life. And that's the story of our lives. That there will always be problems in our lives. I realized this when I was growing up. I used to live with an uncle, and every evening when he comes home, he used to check our homework. But before he did that, he used to play. Back then, we used to call them santuri or sahani. I don't know how they are called nowadays. And before he did that process, he used to play his favorite music by a certain musician called Baraka Muishehe. And the song went like this: Shida haina ngoja ngoja. Even if you have a lot of money, there'll always be trouble. Whether you're young or old, there'll always be trouble. And for me, him playing that kind of music, and of course, the process of him checking my homework never used to end very well. Sometimes he'll slap you and you're wondering, anyway, that's why at least there's nini, like background music just to facilitate the process and just to drum the point in. And sometimes we ask ourselves, do we really have to go through all this? And sometimes it brings us to a point where we even question God. Where is God when I'm going through this? Why do I have to go through all this? And I know you are told, come to Jesus. When you come to Jesus, all your problems are gone. But the truth is, the problems are here with us. And you're either in the middle of a storm, or there's one just around the corner. Or for some of us, we're just coming out of a storm. And my question today, or as you go through this series, and as you ask yourself, where is God when? I want to tell us that never allow the presence of a storm to cause you to doubt the presence of God. Because God is there. When you're going through all these things, God is there. He knows because you're his child. And he's there with you. I want us to read from the book of Acts, chapter 27, verse 20. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, the storms continued raging. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. And after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, Only the sheep will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, man, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Keep up your courage, man, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. This is the story of Paul when he was going to stand trial in front of King Caesar. And so they set sail and they were going to see this king so that Paul could stand trial. And I just thought this passage really captures what we go through as individuals and even as families and even as a country sometimes. And at some point, it says that the storms continued raging. And finally, they gave up all hope. And I feel like a majority of us are in that situation. That we are in the middle of the storm and we are not seeing as if you are going to make it. You're going through something in your life and you're wondering, will I really make it? Will I ever conceive? For those of us who've been trying to have children, will I ever conceive? Will I ever get healed? Because this sickness has really brought you down. Will my marriage work? Because your marriage is is going through a very rough time. And there are all these things that are going on in our lives and they are causing us to doubt the presence of God. We are doubting whether God exists or even he's aware that we are going through all these things. And then to make matters worse, Paul stood before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete." As in, you know, there's some things when you go through and then someone tells you, "I told you, you should not have done that." And I feel like even as you're going through that, not many people are encouraging you. There's no much encouragement coming your way. Paul was just a regular guy who was just stating the fact, because from the beginning of the chapter, it's true that he warned these guys, let us not set sail at this point. And sometimes we want to blame the devil for the things we go through, but simply it's because it's a consequence of the choices that we made. We are in a storm because of the choices we made, the decisions we made. The things you are told not to do are the same things you did. You are told, don't go into this partnership with this guy. You're going to lose all your money. But you told yourself, this guy, he doesn't look that bad. I think people are like, they're not feeling me on this one. So you went ahead, and the guy conned you of your money. And now you're in the middle of a storm. And you're wondering, how will I get myself out of this? For some of us, you are told, don't get into that relationship. Don't date that guy. But you say, but he's so good. He's so handsome. You know, all those excuses. And the one that you tell people, is he even saved? You're like, but he's not bad. You know, he gives to the poor. He comes to church. And you ask, does he acknowledge the power of the cross? And you're like, somehow, but I am not so sure. Or even he acknowledges, but he acknowledges the wrong cross. You know, when Jesus was crucified, there were 3 crosses. Probably he acknowledges the cross. The thief was crucified. So you want to compromise on so many things. You're compromising on so many things. And you want to make it like something that people should just allow and it should continue. You say, oh, he's got potential. But the potential is to ruin your life. And Also, there are people who are in the storms, and it's not your fault. You know, as Esther has said that, God is God. He is sovereign. He can do whatever he pleases to anyone at whatever time. And we can never question that. And God is God, and he will always remain to be God. The fact that you can't get a job, it's not your fault. Maybe the economic times are hard in Kenya. No one is employing, and it is not your fault. It's not like there's a grandmother of yours who rogaed you so that how you can't get a job. It's simple. It's hard everywhere. The economic times are hard. Or probably you are retrenched. Maybe the company is just going through a hard time and you are retrenched, and it's not your fault. You found yourself in a situation that you had no control over. It's not a decision that you made. And even for some of us, we are sick, not because you did anything wrong. And I was just reading the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 7. And it says, when angels went to present themselves before God, even Satan went. That's a story for another day. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth." Yani tangatanga ilianza kitambo sana. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." As in for Job, it was just simply because he was committed to God. And sometimes our faith will be tested just because of our commitment to Christ, not because we did anything wrong. And I'll repeat again. Never allow the presence of a storm to cause you to doubt the presence of God, because God is always there. But then he continues to encourage them in verse 23. "Last night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of those who sail with you. So keep up your courage.' Amen. For I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told you." The presence of God is always with us. When you're in the middle of the storm, the presence of God is always with us. And Paul says that there's an angel who stood beside him even when the storms were raging. And even for us, some of these battles are very spiritual. They are not physical. You can't see them with your physical eyes. Even whatever is happening right now as we are seated here, unless the Lord reveals it to you, you will never understand. You don't know what God is protecting you from as you're seated here. You don't know what God protected you from as you're coming from home to this place. And there are so many battles that are happening in the spiritual realms that we can't see with our naked eyes. But God is always with us, regardless of what we are going through. And even as you ask yourself, where is God when I'm going through all these things? I want to tell you, brethren, that God is right there with you. God is right there with you. And God is there with you, guiding you. He speaks to you. And for those of us who belong in the faith, the Spirit of God dwells within us. And it comforts us. He hears your prayers. And even he directs you when you're hurting. 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 16. It says, "At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I have delivered I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack. And will bring me to safety, to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. And I want to assure us that God has not left us, even if you are going through the storms. And when you know who is with you, a lot changes. If you know God is by your side, it changes your posture, it changes your mood, builds your faith, and directs your mindset. If you know who is with you, it changes everything and your perspective at how you look at things. I remember when I was in high school, I went to a high school probably 2 or 3 kilometers away from my home. And so I used to commute every other day. So the first day I was admitted, there's this guy I thought probably either he's a teacher or he was not, but he was in uniform. He was old. He looked like an employee of Kenya Railways. You know those people who are big and buff. And so the first time we met on the pavement, and the guy pushed me and I into some thickets over there, and then he slapped me. And I said, okay, maybe that was a welcome thingy or a ritual that happens in this school. But it continued. So there's this day he slapped me mpaka nikona stars. In English, I don't know how to explain that, but that slap was proper. So I decided now I'm going home to tell my mom, me this thing of school, me I don't want. So probably he can open up a shop for me, so I become a shopkeeper or something like that. So on my way home, I met a friend of mine. His name was Eguri. And Eguri also was equally big and very dark, and he was mean looking. So he met and he was like, hey, you guy, why are you so upset? Nini. So I described to him the situation, how this guy slapped me. So he told me, tomorrow when you guys are leaving school, I'll be at the gate of your school. So I was like, okay, this could work. So I went to school the following day, very excited. And by the time Agri was meeting this guy, Yani he gave him a proper slap, and this guy fell down. And I was like, okay, this could work to my advantage. So as I was pinching this guy and telling him, do you know who I am? I was pinching my stomach at that moment. Do you know who I am? And things changed from that moment on. I enjoyed my time in school. It's not like I knew how to fight or I could fight this guy, but it's because I was accompanied by my friend. And that changed everything about me in that school. In fact, anyone who was bullied used to come to me and tell me, you know that guy, you called that friend of yours so that we come and discipline this guy. And so for me, my fortunes changed. And in fact, people used to pay me to protect them. So it became a business. But what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that if you know who is with you, and God is greater than anyone who could ever protect you. Like my friend Agri has nothing on God. And as children of God, when we know who God is in our lives, we don't need to walk as if we are very defeated. We need to walk with our heads held high, knowing that God has us. God is able to protect us. God is able to take us through all these things that we are going through. And even as in Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27, talks about the disciples also who are going through a storm. And when the storms were raging, and these guys started crying, and they were like, we are going to die. And, you know, Jesus was just asleep in the boat. And when they woke him up, he woke up and said, peace. And there was peace. And my friend, Jesus can speak to our situations, even this morning, regardless of what you're going through. And my question is, who is in your boat? And why did the disciples experience peace? It's because Jesus was in the boat. Real peace is not found in the absence of a storm. Real peace is found in the presence of Jesus. Real peace is found in the presence of Jesus. I have told you these things, that in me you may have peace. In this world you'll have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. I know you are told, if you give your life to Christ, everything will be new. And even some pastors go to a point where they sell brooms, where you sweep all your problems out of your house. Or there is some special kind of oil that if you apply on yourself, there'll be no trouble that will come your way. But even the scriptures promises us that there'll be trouble. But real peace is found in the presence of Jesus. And I want to tell us that there's peace and there's purpose in a storm. Paul was going to stand trial. And that had been even prophesied before. Because as Paul was being converted, he was told that he will reach out to the Gentiles and even to the kings. Meaning the prophecy had not been fulfilled. So if you're here and you're going through a storm and you've not accomplished those things that God said that you'll accomplish, imagine there's still, for you in this season, you're just learning things, as Esther had said. Sometimes we go through the storms so that we may be able to look back and see where God has taken us through. And there's a purpose in the storm. And so, even in overcoming financial hardships, that God will be there. You don't have to throw in the towel and curse God and say, hey, me, I think it's now. You know the way they say, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Now you go, you leave this God. And you don't have to give up just yet. There are so many people in your lives who you're supposed to impact. There are many people who you're supposed to love. There are many marriages. For those of us who are married, and probably you're going through a storm of marriage, that God will restore your marriage so that when you encounter someone who is going through a storm in their marriage, that you'll be able to walk with them, that you'll be able to walk them through the storm and how God gave you victory even through that particular time. And their lives will be changed. So when you, on the other side of the shore, when you look back, you will say, truly, God was with me. Though you wouldn't want anyone to go through the same, but you wouldn't trade that moment, as Esther is saying, that her faith was strengthened. Because of that, Doris is saying that through the storm, her relationship with God became better. And you wouldn't want to trade that spiritual intimacy, the trust in God that you experience as a result of that. That you'll thank God for the storm that you went through. The third thing is that my faith is not in what I see, but in what He says. Because sometimes we are blinded by our circumstances. We are blinded by the things that we go through. But faith should not be in what we see, what we go through, but in what God says. Because it says, in the last verse, it says, let me just read that. from verse 25. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. And the question is, what has God told you? What are some of the promises that God promised you and they are not fulfilled? And that all these things that are happening will want to make you not to take God by His word and just focus on the storms. Is your faith in your job? Is your faith in your body? Is your faith in the storms? Or is your faith in what God says He will do in your life? My faith is not in the boat, but it's in Him who commands the winds and the waves. My faith is not in the ship, but in the one who created the trees that made the ship. I have faith in God that all will happen. We say that God is the creator of the universe, and He holds everything by His hands. But when we face the storm, sometimes we want to just forget all these promises that God has given us and focus on the difficulty. He's the one who commands the storms. He's the one who spoke even during creation to the world, something that was void and formless. And He formed it just by saying it. So when God says, when you say, I have faith in God, what does it really mean? And my prayer is that we will take God by what He says. That He will be your deliverance. He will bring you healing. No matter the kind of sickness that you're going through. That He will provide for you. If you're going through a season of lack, that God will provide for you. And even in the middle of the storm, that you will experience peace. You cannot control what the storms blow at you, what people say about you, and even what people do to you. But you can control what you believe. You can control what you believe in. That my faith is in God, and what He says will happen. I don't know, are you going through a storm right now? For our God is greater than the roar of raging waters and the mighty waves of the sea. The Lord is enthroned over the floods. That is Psalm chapter 29, verse 10. A storm is simply a hem of His robe, the sign of His coming and the evidence of His presence. Dare to trust Him, dare to follow Him, then discover that the forces that blocked your progress and threatened your life become, at His command, the very materials that He uses to build your streets of freedom. So let's not dread the storms. They are merely God's raw material for something supernatural. I want to ask the worship team to come and lead us in the song, I Surrender All to Jesus. Psalm 46, verse 10, it says, He says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. I don't know what you're going through this morning. But I want us to pray. I want us to surrender that which is troubling our hearts. to him. Maybe if you could just bow our heads, and then I'll ask Pastor Tony to come on stage to pray with us. If there's anything that you're going through and you'd like God to speak into it, just raise up your hand, and then we'll see it, and then Pastor Tony will pray for you. Thank you for that hand. Thank you for all those hands.